It's the World Cup, it's the knockout rounds. We're in New York, we're on a rooftop. ITV, eat your heart out. This is that Football Data Guy podcast. Let's get into it. We're into the last 32. South Africa versus Canada kicked us off with Canada getting a last gasp winner there. We've then moved on to Japan versus Brazil. 2-1 victory for Brazil in the end. Come and join me in the studio and we'll take a look at the data, the tactics, and all the good stuff behind that game.
So we'll start off by looking at the two sides' structures. Now, Brazil started the tournament playing a 4-4-2 against Morocco with Igor Thiago up front. They changed that after that game, and 4-3-3 very much seems to be the formation that they will use going forward. As part of that, you've got a back four with Danilo, Marquinhos, Gabriel, and Douglas Santos. Now, they could potentially have been more adventurous there had Wesley not got injured in the warm-up games. Then Casemiro started the game as a holding midfielder with Guimaraes and Paquetá playing as more 2-8s down there. Vinicius Jr. and Rayan at the sides and Mateus Cunha up front, although not really playing a traditional striker's role, a bit like you see Harry Kane do for England. He's very much dropping deep, looking to get more touches on the ball, and that allowed Vinicius Jr. and Rayan to have space in behind. You can also get more 1-2 link up between Guimaraes and Paquetá there. I was expecting Japan to come out and be a bit more attacking, but they made 4 changes, went with a back three with 3 centre halves, and then had Daichi Kamada and Sano as the 2 holding midfielders, a couple of wing backs, Nakamura the more defensive one, Doan the one who will look to get up the pitch, and then 2 10s in Maeda and Ito, with Ueda up front. Now, they didn't have much possession of the ball at all. They were very much sitting in a defensive block, a 5-3-2, out of possession, and at some points in the second half, a 5-4-1. Nice and compact, only allowing space outside. Casemiro was very much dropping deep and dictating play, trying to find runners out wide. But when you're facing a block like that, you have to find different ways of testing the goalkeeper, working the defence, and creating chances. And Brazil looks pretty toothless in the first half. You can see from the match momentum that actually Japan had the majority of the momentum. They were sitting and they were breaking on the counter-attack when they got the chance. Their first goal came from a loose pass, gave the ball away, and Sano nipped in and was then one-on-one versus Casemiro. Now, this is one of the big weaknesses of this Brazil side. You've got Casemiro and you've got Fabinho as your 2 defensive midfielders, which is great when you've got possession of the ball. They're both very good operators on the ball. Casemiro's got a great range of passes. If you lose the ball in that midfield area, and Japan had made 16 tackles in that midfield area coming into this game, and they'd won 70% of their tackles. So it's clearly an area that they look to focus on. They've got a bunch of great ball winners in the squad. Alongside those 2 that started, they've also got Ayo Tanaka. So a bunch of midfielders who are good at winning the ball back. And then they can catch teams in their transition with fast breaks. When they do break and get chances, they're very good at taking them. Prior to this game, they had the 5th highest XG over performance. That's number of goals scored above the amount of XG generated from their shots. So that's how the first goal came about. Sano nipped in, took the ball off Casemiro, ran down the pitch and basically scored. And from there, Brazil needed to change things up. And you can see that the halftime changes, and it is partially substitutions. Endrick coming on for Paquetá did make a difference and played more as a natural 10, or you almost ended up with a fluid front 4 then. But what that meant is that Bruno Guimaraes here, who was playing as an 8 before, shifted back to play in more of a double pivot alongside Casemiro. That allowed Casemiro to get a bit further forward. It also provided extra defensive cover because both Casemiro and one of the other Brazil players, I want to say Marquinhos potentially. No, Danilo were on yellow cards. So to have that extra screen protecting the defence was helpful there. It meant that Endrick and Cunha could play almost together up front, but also drift out wide, and you had a very fluid front four. When you've got a fluid attacking line, then it's very hard for defenders to know who to pick up, and they just have to sit back and compress the space. Now, we'll talk about the first goal first, because that was one example of that. But then there's another example with further changes that Ancelotti made as well. So we talked about Japan's block. You can see here that they had a very, very low defensive line of 28.36 meters, a very compact compactness of 71.43%. And you've got the majority of players sitting deep, making their defensive actions in their own half. Brazil also quite deep. They didn't really counter press that much. They were very much looking to be in possession. And then again, if you counter press with Brazil's midfield, you could end up in trouble, because if you're throwing players at the ball and you're leaving a relatively slow back line exposed, then you're going to cause yourself problems. So they also look to sit fairly deep. And that left spaces down the wings. You can see from the final third entries, Japan going direct with a lot of them, but the Brazil ones are coming from that centre circle out wide. 50% coming from the middle of the pitch. But when you look at their endpoints, none of them are going through the middle of the pitch. They're coming from the middle and going down the left or down the right. And you can almost see where those balls finish. That is where Japan were defending almost an extended D, a 3-point zone. If you're thinking of it in basketball terms, they're essentially locking that down and just keeping it so that Brazil only had possession down the side. Now, that is dangerous when you've got Vinicius Jr. one side, but then because they're in such a deep block, they're very easy to double up on them. So 103rd final third entries for Brazil, but no real penetration. Now, we've seen that happen in a few games in this tournament so far, given that you have much stronger teams and much weaker teams playing together. The way that Brazil counteracted it was with crosses. Now, Brazil haven't had to utilise their crossing very much in this tournament, but you can see here 36 crosses in total, only 7 successful. Looks like a low number, but crosses are 9 times out of 10 against a low block are going to not hit your targeted player. All it takes is one to be aimed into the right position and you can get joy from it. And that position was not out wide, but they were recycling the ball back to the centre halves, and it was Gabriel that delivered this ball into the head of Casemiro. Now, I mentioned that Guimarães had been covering back. What that allowed is it allowed Casemiro the freedom to get into the box, which wasn't his role prior to half-time, but is something that we've seen him be good at for Manchester United. So that delivery into the box so that he could just head it back past the keeper. And it was in a period of the game where Brazil were on top. If we go back to the match momentum, you can see from the beginning of the second half, they were very dominant. Japan had just got away with a lucky one where they had to clear it off the line with the head of Suzuki. And that's where that goal came from. Now, if we go back to the tactics again, what you also saw is Gabriel Martinelli come on. And Martinelli was floating around and again playing as that kind of free 10 role, which is an unusual position given that we usually see him on the wings for Arsenal. But what he did again in that defensive block, you've got to be very switched on. And we saw it with South Africa against Canada yesterday, that if you don't close down or if you don't get touch tight to players in the final minutes of the game, then that is when you get punished. And Martinelli managed to pull himself in between a couple of defenders, received the ball and finished with precision. So that is the downside of setting up in a low block. You can get hit at the last minute. And it's those intricate passing moves that you can see really carved Japan apart on occasion. The crosses from deep, so you can see the cross from that far left side was one of 4 balls that came from there and 4 chances created from there. Then you had 3 inside the left-hand side of the box. The final goal was where Brazil had possession on the outside of the box and managed to thread the ball through and into the box, which was probably the only time that they really managed to expose Japan's defense like that. And then the last chance creation zone I want to point out is from corners. You've got a couple there from corners, which when you've got Marquinhos and Gabriel as your centre halves are very much a threat. Japan really didn't create much at all and were perhaps disappointing in their attacking play. We know that they can attack and they can score some nice worked goals, but they just couldn't really get that final pass and that final touch to get them over the line in this case. So that is a quick tactical analysis of that. Brazil will play the winner of the Ivory Coast versus Norway game, which will be a much sterner test. And they are then potentially en route to face England if they manage to win their games. I think they have a very balanced side at the tournament. I think the one weakness that I pointed out there with Casemiro and Fabinho as the defensive midfielders, Ancelotti may have found a solution to that. If you change from a 4-3-3 to more of a 4-2-3-1, which is a common formation at the tournament, then that solves your defensive issues. Having Bruno Guimaraes in there gives you extra legs alongside a Casemiro or a Fabinho. But there's still a lack of pace there, and teams could hit them in transition, like Japan did, better teams, potentially a Thomas Tuchel England side. So there's weaknesses there. But then obviously they've got a lot of star quality as well. Some solid defensive players. Vinicius Jr. was kept fairly quiet by being doubled up on, but that created the space elsewhere by covering off Vinicius Jr. They allowed Casemiro to creep in. They didn't pick up Martinelli when he was in that free role. He could have an impact further into the tournament if teams do double up on Vinicius Jr. because he's a very clever player, a very pacey player, and he's an excellent finisher as well. So are Brazil the real deal? Still undecided. I think they will fall to a better team, but they'll go into the later rounds of the tournament, probably quarterfinals, semi-finals. Thank you for watching. As always, if you could drop a like, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more of this. I'll be filming hopefully more often from now on as the tournament progresses and there's not 10 million games a week to keep up, 10 million games a day to keep up with. And I'll see you for the next one.